The first time the apex allowed a human to walk among their hatcheries, every claw in the chamber flexed with restrained instinct. The apex were not cruel by nature. They were efficient. They were predators born on a world where mercy meant extinction and hesitation meant becoming prey. Their cities were carved into obsidian cliffs. Their ships were built like talons. Their children, called cubs despite their towering future forms, were guarded with a ferocity that had ended civilizations. And into the heart of their brood sanctum walked Lieutenant Mara Ellison of Earth. She was unarmed. That fact alone unsettled them. The hatchery chamber was vast, illuminated by bioluminescent veins pulsing through the walls. Rows of incubation cradles lined the cavern floor, each holding an apex cub in its vulnerable molting phase. Their armored plates had not yet hardened. Their claws were soft. Their eyes, enormous and gold, blinked at the strange pink-skinned creature standing at the entrance. Mara kept her hands visible. "I'm here to observe," she said calmly, her voice carrying through the translation field. "Not to threaten." High Sentinel Varkith towered over her. His black carapace bore the scars of orbital wars. His crest flared slightly, a sign of skepticism. "Humans observe what they intend to understand," Varkith said. "And they understand what they intend to conquer." Mara didn't flinch. "Sometimes," she replied, "we also understand what we intend to protect." The chamber went still. The apex had accepted a fragile alliance with Earth only months before. A greater threat had emerged from the dark interstellar gulf, an expansionist machine species known as the Carvex Collective. They consumed biospheres and converted organic matter into weaponized alloy. Against such an enemy, even apex pride had bent toward cooperation. But trust? Trust was harder. Varkith signaled reluctantly. "You may observe. You will remain within my sight." Mara nodded. Over the following weeks, she returned daily. She studied apex growth cycles, environmental controls, nutrient composition. She asked careful questions and listened more than she spoke. The cubs grew accustomed to her scent. One bold hatchling, smaller than the others, his crest still pale, began toddling toward her whenever she approached. Varkith noticed. "He favors you," the sentinel rumbled one cycle. Mara crouched, letting the cub grasp her finger with surprisingly strong talons. "Back on Earth," she said softly, "we call that imprinting." The sentinel's golden eyes narrowed. "He is apex. He imprints on strength." Mara smiled faintly. "Then maybe he sees something you don't." The attack came without warning. A shriek of ruptured air tore through the hatchery dome. Emergency glyphs flared crimson. The ground shuddered as orbital defenses failed in sequence. "Carvex infiltration," roared Varkith. "Protect the brood." The ceiling exploded inward. Metallic tendrils lashed down like spears, embedding into stone and flesh alike. Drone constructs descended, angular and gleaming, their cores burning with cold blue fire. They emitted a piercing harmonic that shattered sensory balance. Mara was thrown against a cradle as debris rained down. She scrambled to her feet. The apex warriors surged forward, intercepting the first wave. Claws met alloy. Bioplasma cannons roared. But the Carvex had calculated precisely. This was a hatchery, not a fortress. Defenses were minimal to preserve environmental stability. A drone pierced a juvenile guardian through the thorax. Another extended a harvesting spike toward a cluster of molting cubs. Time slowed. Mara saw Varkith locked in combat at the far end of the chamber. Too far. The cubs, 3 of them, huddled instinctively, had no defense. She ran. A drone rotated toward her, targeting reticle flashing across her chest. She dove, sliding beneath a sweeping blade and slamming her shoulder into the cradle unit. The impact knocked it sideways, shielding the cubs as the drone's spike drove through reinforced casing instead of flesh. Alarm screamed. Mara, Varkatha's voice thundered. She ripped a fallen Apex plasma sidearm from the ground. It was heavier than human models, its recoil brutal. She fired point-blank into the drone's core. Blue light flared violently before collapsing. Another drone descended. Then another. Mara planted herself between the machines and the cubs. "Get behind me," she shouted instinctively, though the cubs could not understand her language. They understood tone. They pressed against her legs. A blast tore across her side. White-hot agony bloomed. Shrapnel embedded deep into muscle. She staggered but did not fall. The second drone advanced, deploying a fragmentation charge. Varkath broke free from his opponent, sprinting across the chamber. He saw the charge arm. He saw the cubs. He would not reach them in time. Mara did. She lunged forward, grabbing the drone's limb and forcing it upward. The charge detonated midair. Shrapnel rained down. Her body absorbed the majority of it. The blast threw her backward across the chamber floor. She landed in a spreading pool of crimson. The cubs remained untouched. Varkath arrived seconds later, carving the final drone in half with a scream that shook the cavern. Silence fell. Smoke drifted through broken light. The Carvex drones lay in pieces. The cubs were alive. Mara Ellison was not. The Apex gathered in the central war circle. Mara's body lay upon a raised stone slab, cleansed of debris. Apex healers had tried. Their regenerative methods were potent, but human biology was fragile compared to theirs. Too much blood lost. Too many internal ruptures. High Sentinel Varkath stood at the head of the circle. "She was prey-born," murmured one elder. "Soft. Fragile." "She stood against machines without a carapace," another replied quietly. Varkath extended one massive claw and touched the blood-stained fabric of her uniform. "She shielded the cubs with her flesh," he said. No Apex fled. But she alone stood where none were positioned. Silence. The small, pale-crested cub, the one who had imprinted, approached cautiously. He pressed his head against Mara's still hand. A low rumble passed through the assembly. "She did not calculate odds," Varkath continued. "She did not possess hardened armor. She possessed choice. And she chose them," an elder finished. In Apex culture, strength was defined not by survival, but by dominance. To die was failure unless one's death ensured the continuity of the bloodline. Only then did death become sacred. The council convened immediately. Word spread across Apex space within hours. A human had died protecting their young. Not in battle for territory. Not for strategic gain. For cubs that were not her own. Some dismissed it as sentimentality. Others studied the footage. The recording from the hatchery showed Mara's final stand from 3 angles. Her movements were erratic but fearless. She interposed her body with no hesitation. The cubs survived because of her positioning, because of her sacrifice. The Apex do not cry, but their war fleets mobilized. Earth received the transmission 3 cycles later. Admiral Hoshino stood in silence as the holographic projection displayed Mara's final moments. Around him, Earth Command watched with clenched fists. "She was assigned as liaison," one officer whispered. "She was more than that," Hoshino said quietly. The Apex message concluded with Varkatha's voice. "She was not Apex by birth. But by deed, she entered the bloodline. We request alliance expansion. The Carvex will answer." Earth's response was immediate. They would answer together. The joint offensive began at the edge of the Carvex-occupied systems. Apex dreadnoughts advanced in spearhead formation. Human carriers flanked with fighter screens and long-range artillery. Before the first engagement, Varkith initiated a broadcast across both fleets. On every Apex vessel, warriors stood in silence. On every human ship, crews watched the unfamiliar ritual unfold. A blade was raised. It was forged from recovered Carvex alloy, refined and reshaped. Along its edge, etched in both Apex glyph and Terran script, were the words, Mara Ellison, Guardian of the Brood. One blade became hundreds. Each Apex warrior carried one into battle. We do not forget. Varkith's voice thundered across the void. Her flesh shielded our future. Our claws will shield hers. The assault was merciless. The Apex, once cautious against the machine collective, now attacked with singular purpose. Human tactical precision complemented their ferocity. Apex boarding parties carved through mechanical corridors, blades flashing. Human Marines planted EMP charges at critical nodes. The Carvex adapted. They escalated. But something had changed in the Apex psyche. They were no longer defending territory. They were avenging blood. The war lasted 7 standard months. It ended with the destruction of the Carvex primary forge world. Years passed. The pale-crested cub matured into a towering warrior known as Rethvar. He bore no visible softness. His armor was obsidian black. His claws had ended enemies in 3 sectors. But at his side hung a blade slightly shorter than the others. The first blade, the original forged in Mara's name. Rethvar requested, and received, permission to visit Earth. When his vessel descended through Terran skies, humanity watched cautiously. But the war had rewritten history. Apex ships were no longer omens of invasion. They were allies. Rethvar arrived at a modest coastal city. He stood before a simple memorial stone engraved with Mara's name. Flowers lay at its base. Human tradition. He placed the blade gently against the stone. You are correct, he rumbled softly, recalling her words long ago. Strength is not only dominance. He removed one of his armored gauntlets and pressed his clawed hand to the stone surface. My kind will teach our cubs your name, he said. They will know that an Apex is not defined by carapace alone. Behind him, a group of human children watched in quiet awe. One stepped forward timidly. Were you there? She asked. Rethvar looked down at her small, unarmored form. Yes. Was she scared? He paused. The memory replayed with perfect clarity. Shrapnel, fire, pain. No, he said at last. She was resolute. The child nodded solemnly. That means brave, she said. Rethvar inclined his head. Yes, he agreed. It does. Back in Apex space, a new wing of the primary hatchery was constructed. At its entrance stood a statue unlike any other in their history. It was not an Apex warrior. It was a human, unarmored, kneeling, arms outstretched, shielding 3 cubs beneath her. Beneath it, in glyph and Terran script, were carved the words, She gave her life for their young. The Apex never forgot. And they never did. Every cub that passed beneath that statue learned her story. Every warrior carried her name into battle. And when future generations asked why the Apex honored a prey-born species, the elders would answer, because strength is not measured by what you kill. It is measured by what you protect. In the vast and violent darkness of the galaxy, that lesson endured. And so did she.